Okay, so in today's class, we will first begin with how to what is the basic approach of modeling. Okay, so we will begin with the very fundamental concept of modeling, and then we are essentially coding it. Okay, so this is a problem which we have done in our class, like in the very beginning of this semester, an old one. All of you have also worked on the models also, but how does modeling help you to understand uh, the behavior of the uh, device or the system? So that's the objective. Okay, and which kind of companies essentially need these modeling experts? Okay, so this is already done in the class. I'm not going into this. So this is the pen and paper based mathematical modeling which you have to do. Okay, and what we will understand is that using these models, these equations, whatever we have finally obtained, these equations simply give you a relation between various parameters. Okay, so now our objective will be to code it such that we can study the situation, study the behavior based on the variation of the different parameters. Okay, for example, when we have when we have developed these models, it was not very clear like what is the significance of these equations. So it will become clear only when we plot it and essentially look into it. So this is, in the process, what we have developed over here is something called a simulator. Okay, so many of you are already aware of LT-SPICE, right? So that's a simulation program with integrated circuit emphasis. Okay, SPICE. So LT-SPICE is Linear Technology is the name of the company. So they designed LT-SPICE. Similarly, you have got P-SPICE, T-SPICE, H-SPICE, Tanner, many SPICE variations are there. But the basic concept remains the same. So in this course on modeling, the physics and modeling of multi-electronic devices, in this course, uh, what we are learning are the various physics and the models involved in the devices. Okay, now what our objective will be in the laboratory section, laboratory part of this course. What we will try to do is we will try to um, the models will be developed in the class, in the lectures, as we have seen. And then in the laboratory, what we will do is we will develop the simulators based on those models, okay, those analytical models. In some cases, we will observe that, for example, in the uh, finite potential well problem, it was not possible for us to develop an analytical model. So we have to solve this numerical methods. Okay, so that will also be part of one of the lab assignments. Then, for example, periodic infinite potential well. So the model which we had developed was this. Then you have to solve this one. Whatever you see over here, this figure and this figure, I could not dare to draw it by hand because it is numerical method. So it is difficult for me to draw. So that's why it is the solution of the laboratory problem which I'm going to share with you. We will see how to solve numerically later on. So this is an analytical approach. The first problem, let us see how I have solved it. Okay, this is kind of a very a basic introduction to Python, if you can call it. But Python means also the scientific Python. Okay, that is numerical Python, Matplotlib. Later on in the course, when we are dealing with more complicated problems, we will go by SciPy also. So um, let me illustrate a couple of things. Yeah. So yeah. So when we are dealing with Python, Python is basically a scripting language. I've already discussed in one of the lectures or labs, I forgot. So in Python, we are essentially going to use the aspect of Python which is really helpful is that it is a scripted language, easy to code, and you do not have to bother about compilation and all this. Okay, of course, the downside of Python is that we are going to lose on the performance of the packages which you are developing. Now, in modern world, okay, in fact, remember Python has come about pretty recently, if I can call it, like probably before 10 years ago when I was a student myself. At that time, nobody heard about Python. So Python has become such an important topic today because number one, in modern technology, in modern world, uh, I mean, the processors are so fast, okay, that we don't bother about the slow performance of Python. We don't bother so much about this. So there are two aspects of when we are developing, when we are a developer. So that means if you are working in any software firm, if you are working in Google, Microsoft, or even if you are working in like IP industries, VLSI industries, if you are a developer, basically, then there are two things which you have to keep in mind. Okay. Number one is called development time. And number two is runtime. Okay. Now, previously, like several years ago, before we had solid state drives or fast processors, in those era, we were primarily concerned about the runtime. Okay, runtime used to be a very important. That means you have some objective in mind and you spend some time. You means in the sense the engineers in the company, they will spend several man hours to develop a program. Okay, now this program which you have developed, okay, this program is a few sets of lines of code. When you are running it, finally that executable, when you are running that program, the time taken for the program to deliver its output is called the runtime. You might remember that when you were writing C++ codes, you often ended up with a code error called runtime error. Okay, so it means it is I mean, so this is basically that executable code. In Windows we will call it specifically by exe. On Linux it doesn't matter. You can make the properties of the file executable without any hindrance on the particular extension. So in the development time, we are essentially converting uh, some C code, compile it, and essentially get this. Okay. Now this compilation process is essentially C code. Okay. A code which you have written that will be compiled to an exe, and exe will run at the runtime. So the whole objective was that you are essentially sharing this exe with your client. Okay, so that means for if you are looking, suppose you want to download some software. Okay, you will notice that on Windows you will be downloading some exe file. So that exe file is essentially that executable, which if you click it, it will start working on Windows. Very simple. If it is an open source, then you can have access to the original C code as well. So that is the difference between open source and free. Okay, so for example, I can share with you right now. This is Spider. Spider is an ID which is kind of pretty famous, but I do not know for the last. Yeah. Yes, this is a Spider. Okay, Spider is the IDE. Probably many of you are already using. So this is an open source program. So if you're downloading Anaconda or something with exe, that means the Spider is, I mean, it is possible for you to even go into the C code of Spider and try to tweak it. I do not remember whether it is written in C or Python, but anyway, you can see the original code. Whereas today I will show another one. This is kind of an industrial standard of writing Python code. Spider is not an industrial standard, to be honest. Spider is primarily used in academia because it is open source, but it is not as much well maintained as this one, which is called Microsoft Visual Code or Visual Studio Code. Okay, you can also have Microsoft Visual Studio. So as you can understand, this is Microsoft coding platform. So it is free, but not. I mean, it's completely proprietary. So it's free, but not open source. So if I want, I will not get the I will not get the C code behind this. It is maintained only by Microsoft. Okay, so I'm very comfortable in both Spider as well as this VS Code. So if you are into coding, you can try out VS Code because this VS Code platform is very interesting. For example, in Python, in Spider, you will be using Spider only for numerical or calculation or scientific usage of Python. Okay, so that means in Spider it is kind of limited. So in Spider you are not only using only Python, you are restricted to only Python. So that means in any case, suppose in industry you see that okay, they are not using Python, but you have to code in C language or C++ or something else, Java. You cannot use Spider anymore. Okay, so Spider is specifically for Python, and that too it is primarily oriented towards it is supposed to be like an open source alternative of MATLAB, so to speak. Okay, so whereas if you are into coding, and I am into coding, so I code in C++ also. So in that case, Microsoft Visual Studio happens to be the industrial standard of this. So quite honestly, Microsoft has made many junk software before, but for example, Windows itself is a junk OS. I personally like Linux much better, even better than Mac. In my home, I have got a full MacBook Pro, but I prefer Linux. Anyways, so my idea is that I will always recommend that if you require coding things, so you should try out with Microsoft Visual Studio. Okay. Anyways, let's come back to business here. So the difference what I wanted to make is like Spider is being an open source, you can have access to the C code of Spider. Obviously the exe is available, whereas in case of a proprietary but free software, you will not have this original code, you will only get the exe. Now in runtime, as I was telling you, runtime is all about how the software performs from the exe to give its final output. So that means when I am coding in let us say this one, so whatever software you use essentially on Windows or this, you are essentially using the exe version of it. Okay, so that is called the runtime. But when you are a developer, you will be working with the C code, the original code of it, right? So your objective will be to compile it so that you can essentially produce one exe which you can sell to your clients. Okay, everybody with me? Now, in the initial days, okay, this runtime used to be a major concern because you do not have a control about what kind of system your clients were having. Okay, so that means suppose you have written one code, okay, and then you have developed one executable file. Now that executable file is something which let us say I am the developer. I have developed one exe code which I am sharing with all the students. So out of all the 34-35 students, somebody will say, sir, I am still in Windows XP, and this exe which you have developed, I mean my computer doesn't support your exe. So what do? I cannot always kind of enforce that all my clients will be working with the latest software and latest hardware, right? So that is the reason why earlier days, like one generation ago, so to speak, like when I was a student at that time, people used programming languages like C++. C++ is just an object-oriented version of C. So basically, it becomes easier to maintain the code. That's it. So I used to code in C++ during my PhD and before that. So when I was coding in C++, at that time, what we used to find is that it takes a much longer time to write the C code, C or C++ code, compile it into a bug-free exe, which is sellable, which we can essentially produce in the market, right? So after that, the runtime will be much better. So if you have written a C code, it will definitely work. Like, I mean, the possibilities are that it is going to work very well, even for all several of the um, I mean underpowered computers also, because the runtime for the C code is basically a compiled one, so essentially it will run much faster. This was like one generation ago, like 10-15 years ago. In today's technology, this runtime is not a problem at all. So if you want to optimize your program, your IP, uh, with the perspective of runtime, then what you do is you spend longer hours in the development time using Java or C++, and finally develop one exe which will run faster on client systems. Okay, so you essentially turn out to spend like 30 days to create one exe which will run in 3 milliseconds. That was, I mean, like much earlier. But in modern technology, where we are having very good systems, so even an average computer is underutilized. So that means, in fact, your smartphones, most of our smartphones are underutilized. So if you ever check out your RAM utility, you will notice that even the cheapest smartphones are having like 4 GB, and you tend to use only 2 GB out of it. Okay, so that means even your smartphone is underutilized. Forget about your laptop and desktops and all that. Okay, so as a consequence, we do not have a problem about the runtime or the resources necessary to run this exe anymore. Okay, so compared to the previous days, we can still use 3 milliseconds, or let us say even like we can afford 4 milliseconds. We can increase that runtime. However, if you use programs like Python and all that, instead of 30 days, it can be developed in 3 days. So in modern industries, Google, for example, Google is a very, one of my favorite software companies. So in Google, what they'll prefer to do is they'll try to, for them, it will be much preferable to spend like 3 days of man hours, develop a product, and essentially use the runtime with 1 millisecond or 2 milliseconds higher time. Okay, so if the same thing had been done like 10-15 years ago, what will happen? This 4 millisecond would have worked with, let us say, 4 minutes. Okay, with the softwares and the hardware which are available, like let us say 15 years ago. But as of now, this 4 minutes has turned into 4 milliseconds. So basically, the compromise with the runtime is hardly, you will hardly even recognize the difference. But what is the advantage from the perspective of the development time is much reduced. Okay, now this is how the Python codes work. So what is a Python? Python is basically sort of a wrapper over the original C code. So Python language itself is written in C. Please try to understand that. So C is the mother of all languages, so to speak. So basically, so I am always recommending you to write in Python. Okay. All right. So yes. So in Python, another major advantage is that I'll show you something. Will be informative for you. Okay. So when I was doing my PhD, at that time, I used something called GSL or GNU Scientific Library. So what is this all about? What this GSL did was, this is essentially, uh, let me just show you, then it will become easier. Yeah, function areas in GSL. So this is basically a collection of scientific libraries which are written in C. Okay, so that means you can use roots of polynomials, complex numbers, special functions. You can see this, I guess. Let me enlarge this. Okay, so if you notice, there is something called BLAS. What is the full form of BLAS? Anybody can tell me? Hello, can anybody tell me? Have you heard what is the meaning of BLAS? BLAS stands for Basic Linear Algebra System. Okay. Okay. So BLA stands for Basic Linear Algebra System. Okay. BLAS. Now, why is this BLAS so important? Come back here. Sorry, where was it? Yeah. This BLAS, which you see, that was the forerunner of Fortran. Okay. So, I mean, even before, when I was in school, probably, or even before that, in the 1980s, 1970s, and all that, during that time, Fortran used to be the fundamental language for all kind of scientific or technical programming. Okay, so Fortran was essentially based on this BLAS. Okay, now this BLAS grew into Fortran, and everybody used that. Now, this BLAS support was essentially introduced in the C programming because C is much more ubiquitous uh, than Fortran, right? So this BLAS support was essentially extended to C. And as you can see over here, there is like huge gamut of scientific or technical libraries for the C or C++. I used many of these during my PhD. So now, uh, like you can see, is the numerical library for C and C++ programmer. This is free software under GNU. So now the thing is, how did MATLAB come into being? So GSL is a very tough beast, to be honest. I can kind of assure you that, because I spent a lot of development time to design or write the codes during my PhD. Then, but why did I bother about doing it? Because the codes which I used to run, they used to take around 1 week of 24 into 7 computation just to give the results. Okay, so those kind of very difficult codes, of course, that 1 week will be reduced to like 3 days in modern uh, hardware. But anyways, so this kind of development time I had to spend writing the C++ code. And then nowadays we don't bother, because instead of using this GNU scientific library, which are the bunch of technical or scientific libraries, as I can show you here, we can use that in Python. So Python is a very, very, modular language, so to speak. So if you are speaking about Python, so of course, remember, I'm always speaking about Python 3 whenever I speak about Python. So Python will essentially have, let us say, one, the numerical, simply I'll call it NumPy library, Number 2, matplotlib. Now this NumPy is basically numerical Python. It doesn't really have the uh, entire plethora of all the functions. So in the first several of these mm, I mean lab tutorials, labs, basically labs for this course, we will be using this NumPy and matplotlib. Okay, later on we will learn something called SciPy. That is a scientific Python which will be used for optimization, okay, numerical fitting, and much more complicated functions, even special functions. Okay, special functions are absent in NumPy. Okay, so for gamma function, beta function, okay, Z transforms, um, so Fourier transforms, Laplace transforms, all those things are available in SciPy, not in NumPy. NumPy is basically numerical Python, just like a typical array kind of thing, which we use in MATLAB. Okay, so SciPy is like that. Then there is something called SymPy, that is symbolic Python. This is used to, get the equations of it. But I do not think that in this course we'll be able to deal with SymPy. And then number 5, um, I shall write it in red. Oh, sorry. Right. Okay. So here the SymPy, and the other one I will write is scikit-learn. Scikit-learn is one of the modules for machine learning. Okay. Um, if you want to go for deep learning, you require something called TensorFlow. Let me put a hyphen over here. So these are okay. Another very important thing which I would also like to tell you, that in fact I should put here something called pandas. Okay. What is pandas? Pandas is the library for Python which basically deals with huge CSV files. So that means, suppose you are working with a large data set. So pandas is kind of very, very important when you are dealing with um, machine learning. In machine learning, we will be having data sets of, let us say, like thousands of data points, right? So thousands is basically a less number. If you are doing with deep learning, it will be something like millions of data points. So larger the data set, better will be your learning for the computer program. Okay, in those cases it will be very difficult for you to analyze just the arrays as such. So in those cases it is much simpler to use CSV files, or um, what is that, ODS, opened document spreadsheet, or else you can also use the format simple Excel sheet. That is also okay. Okay, so pandas basically deals with those. So if you are trying to work on data science, then pandas, scikit-learn, TensorFlow, and of course matplotlib is always there. So in our programs in this course, we have started with this NumPy and matplotlib. Matplotlib is just for plotting, NumPy is for the arrays. And later on, we will probably work on SciPy in this course. Okay, scikit-learn, TensorFlow, SymPy, I do not think if it would be really helpful. I can of course show, or I can design a few problems in the library, in the lab component, where you can use pandas a little bit, so that on your CV you can write all these modules. So all these 7 modules are something which I know, which I have worked on. Okay, so we have begun with NumPy and Matplotlib as the libraries. Okay, so now let's come back to our program. So here, notice, yeah, let me put it this way. So when I have asked you to write the program, right? So this was the problem given to you, right? Derive a mathematical model or develop a mathematical model for this. This mathematical model has already been done in the class. Sorry, not this. Uh, yeah, the mathematical model is done from scratch using quantum mechanics, and these boxes are the models. Okay. Now, what was the next part? Plot the wave function as a function of this. Okay, so you might be thinking that, okay, I'm asking you to just to make a plot. Remember, in the process of plotting, you have to essentially use Python, C++, any MATLAB, anything. But I will always recommend you to use Python, and the reasons is already obvious to you, I think, by now. So in Python, what I have done is I have simply coded this particular these functions. Okay, so that means as long as x is less than 0, x is less than the barrier, the junction point. Here I have put 0, but we will relax that part later. So on the left hand side of the barrier, you are having psi1 as a function. Right side of the barrier, we are having psi2 as the function. Very simple. Okay, so look how I have written the program like this. You can of course make a program much better than this also. So I have imported the NumPy library. So if you notice in the docs, you can essentially go for all the documentation. So let's not bother about that. So this as NP is basically one short form of writing NumPy. Otherwise, every time I'm calling this NumPy functions, we have to write this NumPy every time. So it's just a alias, you can call it. Now, Matplotlib is a very, very big library. In the Matplotlib, you will have several sub-modules like PyPlot, where you will be essentially having various functionalities. Okay, so PyPlot is for 2D plots. Later on, we will see in 3D plots, we will do contour. Okay, we will plot contour plots, visualizations. So these tools are extremely important for data science also. Okay, where you have to visualize the data. So in fact, whatever we are doing as part of this lab component, that will essentially will be a huge step forward in the domain of data science. So later on, those of you who want to kind of specialize in that, you can go in that domain also. Anyways, so all I have done, as I have shown earlier, I have defined two functions over here. Okay, in Python, functions are written like this. Okay, so if you notice carefully, here there is one 2 into e to the power of minus delta into I 1j, that is I, into cos k1x plus delta. As you can clearly see, psi1 is this. Okay, psi2 is this, but you will notice that I have omitted this value of a. I could have even added a and put some particular value of a, but it is kind of foolish because I would like to plot normalized wave function on the y-axis. Okay, so I don't have to bother about this amplitude a anymore. All right, very good. Why have I omitted just this a? Because remember, the incident wave function is a e to the power of I k1x. So the amplitude of the incident wave is only capital A. Okay, तो अगर हम normalize करते हैं ना, तो ये capital A cancel हो जाएगा. ठीक है? All right. So this x part, x is basically the okay. Let me show it like this. So x is basically the distance in nanometers. Okay. So I have just varied it from some place to some place, but they are in nanometers. As you can see, e to the power of -9. It's a very, very good practice. Like all of you who are beginning, you should always make a small comment out section which will highlight the units. Okay, that will really help you later on. I'm sorry. Okay, Just a second. Right. Okay, so it will be a very good practice for you to always have these units mentioned wherever you are introducing something. Okay, so initially I am trying to find out the how this model will develop, or this model means this mathematical model which I have written over here, how these equations will perform for some quantum particle which we have a very clear idea. Okay, so let's begin with electrons. Okay, so I know the electronic mass. This is of course the rest mass. I have highlighted that it is in kgs. These units will essentially help you a lot. So if you are trying to write the program in terms of nanometers, make sure that you are not putting e power minus 9 over here. Okay, all right. So now x0 is something which I have deliberately put as a separate quantity. So x0 uh, is the exact location of the barrier. Okay, so if we get back to our class, you will notice I have put 0 over here, but there is no guarantee, I mean no necessity that this boundary has to be at 0. I have gone through some of your programs. Many of you have written with x equal to 0 as the boundary. May not be actually, isn't it? I can if, so basically if you have done written the program like that, what will happen the moment I shift the boundary, the junction, immediately your entire program will start malfunctioning. So that's kind of a bug. Okay, so now this is the mass q, electronic charge, everybody knows. So the energy of the electron I have started as uh, what is the energy of the electron here? Notice I have put E equal to q. Q is the electronic charge, so q into 1 electron volt. Okay, that means q joules. Okay, please understand the units over here. This is h bar or h cross, that is h Planck's constant here divided by 2 pi. Okay, so pi is already there in the numpy, so I have just used numpy modules. Okay, so you can see the documentation in details if you are using Visual Studio. All right, so now V0 is an arbitrary height of the energy barrier. Now notice how much joules have we taken? Q joules, right? And this finite potential barrier problem essentially means that the barrier height is much larger. The energy barrier of the uh, of the of, of the like the V naught V0. Okay, the energy barrier is much larger than the energy of the electron. So if the energy of the electron is Q, I have arbitrarily chosen 10 over here, which is 10 times than of Q. So we can essentially choose, we can say that, okay, the barrier height is much larger than the energy of the electron. Clear? So notice when I'm writing the code, I am not taking into account the minor details of it. We will come into this soon after the program starts working. Now, this K2 and K1, okay, this is the K2 expression. So how will we get the K2 expression? K2 is here. Okay, if you notice, K2 is given by square root of twice m V naught minus E. Square root of twice m here into V naught minus E divided by H bar. Okay, so I have just coded this in Python, in terms of Python. Okay, then what is the value of the delta? Because remember, we have one delta in the function, right? So delta ka value kahan se milega? Again, we had developed that value. Let's see, where is the delta expression? Yes, here. Okay, delta is equal to tan inverse K2 by K1. Okay, so K2 is here, and we have got K1 also, twice ME by H cross. Okay, so once we have got that, then we have got delta as tan inverse K2 by K1. That's exactly what we had here, tan inverse of k2 by k1. So we have also done the same in line number 16. Okay. Then uh, you could have also used if then else. I have seen many of you have done that. But what I will recommend is that Python is a very versatile language. Okay, so there is something like this. NumPy has got one uh, member function that is called select. So what it does is it will automatically choose the particular function depending on the ranges. Okay, so what did we see in our actual class, that as long as x is less than 0 we will have psi1, as x is less greater than 0 you will have psi2. Okay, so the same thing I have written, when x is less than x0, notice I have defined, I have not put 0 here. Many of you have, what you have done is you have directly put 0. Okay, let's make it as a variable. Okay, although we have started x0 equal to 0, later on I am going to shift that uh, junction and we will see what is the influence on the wave function. Okay, then x is less than x0, the other one is x is greater than or equal to x0. Then when x is less than x0, then what is the value of psi1? Again, in most of you, what you have done is psi1 as a function of x, or you have directly written the function over here in if then else statement. So np.select is a construct which is essentially taking care of the if then else itself. Okay, so now what we are going to do is, so when x is less than x0 it will take psi1 x minus x naught, because x naught is the junction which we have chosen over here. Okay, on the contrary, in our class we chose x equal to 0, so this x minus x0 is nothing more than origin shifting. Okay, so when x is greater than x0 you will have psi2, very simple, like that. Okay, the reason why I have printed this out, it's not necessary as part of the lab, is because I wanted to see uh, at x0, that means exactly when the wave function is penetrating that barrier. Okay, then at that particular boundary what is the magnitude of the psi. So that means essentially what I'm trying to find out is the probability of finding that electron exactly on the junction. Of course, that is something which I wanted to see myself, it's not part of the code. Okay, it's not part of the question, so to speak. Now when I'm plotting it on the x-axis, I have provided x into 10 power 9. Reason is very obvious, because x we have chosen as in the units of meters. Okay, look, it was the unit of meters. So if I put it as unit of meter, it will be minus 3 10 power minus 9 10 power minus 9. Instead of that, let us make it much simpler. I have just used the unit nanometers in the x label. Okay, so if you notice here in line number 21, I have put x label as in nanometers. So the moment I put nanometers in the plot, I need to show it in terms of into 10 power minus 10 power 9. Okay, and then I have plotted the value of psi function in the select. Okay, now in the y label, I have to put normalized, clear, because I have omitted this capital A value in the original functions. Okay, now I think rest of the things are very simple. Okay, this this is axis vertical line. You can again come here, and so if you come to the docs, okay, you will have, you can go through the documentation, or you can simply google it. Okay, now this is axis horizontal line, this is axis vertical line. The reason why I have drawn this is I wanted to highlight the exact location of the junction of the barrier. Okay, in most of your codes you have not highlighted this, but anyway still it is okay, because I mean That's fine as long as you understand it. So I wanted to highlight the junction, and this is 0. So that means you understand that there is, I mean, how soon inside the junction the uh, tunneling is happening. Okay, remember that concept of tunneling width. So this is the tunneling width. We will look into this immediately after explaining this program. So after plotting the wave function, I have also included this dot. What is this red dot? That is the point where the wave function is tunneling inside the barrier. Okay. So how did I obtain that? It is nothing other than psi 1 comma 0. Okay, the point where the psi 1 is essentially crossing the 0 value. Okay, very good. These vertical lines are essentially to annotate the axis. This is title and this. That's okay. Now, uh, this is how I have written the program. This is, of course, my version. You will have different versions also. Okay, so that was number 2. We have written the code and we have shown the functions. Now comes the very, very important part. Discuss the physical insights on the quantum phenomena associated with this system. Now, this is something which is not so evident when we are trying to do the modeling in the class. In this mathematical model, it is not so clear. Now we will see how it changes. Okay. The first thing that we will do is we will change the position of x0. Okay, so instead of this 0, I will put something like, let us say 1 10 to the power of minus 9. Okay, so once we do that, let's F5. So what has happened? If you notice that the wave function, the barrier has shifted by 1 and the wave function has shifted, I mean, simply this kind of the y-axis has shifted by 1. Awesome. Now if I do it, say minus 2, let's F5. Okay, this is pretty clear. Okay. This is not much of a problem as such. So, all right. Now what we will try to do is, let us see if we are using a much more heavier particle. Okay. So we have chosen electron for this, for writing the code, isn't it? Suppose I use proton or something. Proton will be like 1,000 times heavier. Then what is the situation? So I will just talk about the order. So um, what is the weight of a atomic nucleus? Let's say it is 29. Okay, remember the unit is in kgs. Now we will try to understand what happens if we simply replace the electron with a proton or a nucleus. I'm not bothered about the exact mass of the proton or something. I'm just saying what will happen if we are increasing the weight of the system. This is 10 power minus 31 was the electron weight. It is now 10 times heavier than electron. Okay, let's run this. Okay, so what did we get it here? So this x0 is now 1 10 power minus 9. Okay, so now the junction is over here. What we get is the conclusion out of this experiment using the simulator is that if, as we are increasing the weight of the quantum particle, what is happening? Hello, are you there? Or hello?
Yes, sir.
So it simply means that the wave nature of the particle has simply increased its uh, it's decreased its wavelength. Okay, now if we go for even heavier particle, now let's see, this is now 100 times heavier than electron. So this is how it look like. Okay, so now we can understand the influence of the heavier the particle, smaller will be the wavelength. Okay, so now let's do one thing. I'll put my weight. This is the wave function of, this is my wave function. This is absurd, right? So now we can clearly understand using the small experiment which we have done using the simulator is that if we are, smaller the particle or lesser the weight of the quantum particle, the quantum effects become more and more prominent. If I have put 70 kilos, I weigh something like 70 kilos myself. So if it is around 70 kilos, that means what happens is you are essentially going to get like a smeared up wave function. So you are not going to observe anything quantum mechanical. Okay. So, okay, everybody. All right. So let's come back to electrons once again. Now, what happens if we change the charge of the particle? Okay. This was the part, right? So this is 10 power minus 19 is the electronic charge, elementary charge. If I काम करते हैं, let's make it 2 into q. That means the because remember this is we wrote this. I wrote this program for with keeping electrons in my mind. So I can have an alpha particle, right? So alpha particle is a helium nucleus. So helium nucleus will have 2 protons, right? So if it is 2 protons, means it is going to have 2 into q charge. So for the same, instead of electron, if I had used a helium nucleus, that is alpha particle as the quantum particle, then what is the situation? What has happened? Check it once again. This was the electron. We had 1, 2, 3. 3 complete wavelengths, right? I am multiplying it by 2. If you are using helium nucleus, that is alpha particle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, roughly 4.5 or something. So that means again it behaves the same way as the mass of the particle. So that means if you are increasing the charge of the particle, or if you are increasing the mass of the particle, the effect remains the same. Okay, it simply increases the it decreases the wavelength. Okay, very good. Now what happens if we increase the energy of this particle? Okay, so let's make it double the energy, keeping the barrier height the same. अब देखते हैं. Earlier, now if you notice, the maximum is now much higher than 0.75. It is around say 0.8 or something. Okay. Earlier, what was the amplitude? 0.6, around 0.6. So that means if you are increasing the energy of the particle, अच्छा फिर से और एक चीज देखो. If you are increasing the energy of the particle, what is the value of, what is the probability that the electrons will essentially tunnel? देखो ये बहुत important है. I'll also put that print value is also here. So down below you will be able to see the values. Yes. Of course, this is an imaginary number because this is a psi function. So if you take the magnitude of it, that is psi star psi, or basically the mod of psi square, then basically you will be getting the amplitude. Let's not bother about that. Just try to look at this figure. I have taken the print. Remember, I told you there is a reason why I took this print, so that I can get an understanding, a mathematical value, kind of numerical understanding of what is the probability with which the electrons will enter into the barrier or tunnel inside the barrier. देखो ये 0.629 minus 1.887 J is the imaginary square root of infinity, square root of -1. All right, so now what we will do is, अभी हम क्या करेंगे, एनर्जी को बढ़ा देते हैं. Now the energy of the electron is twice the 5. Now if you notice that the value over here is actually larger than the previous one. Okay, so if you notice earlier, in the earlier case, I'll show it like this. Let me remove this 2 and show it once again. Look at the dot. This red dot was happening close to 0.2. That is the magnitude, right? So now if I make it just double the energy, particle energy, then what is the situation? From 0.2 it has come to almost like 0.4 or something. So the energy, if you increase the energy of the particle, if the particles are more energetic, they will have higher probability of penetrating inside the barrier. Okay, everything remaining the same. The mass of the particle is like the electron mass, electronic charge. Just I've increased the energy of the particle, of the electron. There is no, I mean, you cannot change the h bar, that is a constant. K1 is essentially derived from here. Now let us see what is the influence of, yeah, this is the original where we have started. Let us now see the influence of the barrier height. Now the energy of the particle is again just 1 into q, electronic charge only, that is 1 electron volt. So if the energy of the particle is 1 electron volt, this is, remember, q joules means 1 electron volt, and the barrier height we have chosen as 10 electron volts. So instead of that, let us do one thing, let's make it 11 or 20. Okay, so it's now 20 electron volt. यहाँ पर देख लेना 0.6 है. What is the influence? क्या हुआ? What did we observe? That if the energy of the particle remains as it is, but we have simply increased the barrier height from 10 to 20 electron volt, all we have observed is that the amplitude has reduced. Even the amplitude at the junction has also reduced. It is now less than 0.2. So that means higher the barrier height, lower is the penetration of the electron. Okay? So now you can understand, if we are making it, now can you connect the dots? I told you that if the barrier height becomes infinity, याद है ना, in the class we have said infinite potential well barrier. तो infinite के बदले में एक काम करते हैं, let's put another 0 here, 200 times. Let's see the probability, I mean how much of tunneling will be happening. Okay, so now if you notice, the amplitude has become 0.15, and here it is much less. Okay, so that is also 200 electron volt, and the energy of the particle is 1 electron volt. अच्छा, यहाँ पर infinity कहे थे ना, infinite potential well barrier अगर है, then what is the situation? और एक zero बिठा दी, that means 2000 electron volt. What do you see? That means the probability that the electron will penetrate inside the barrier is practically zero when we are making sure that the barrier height is extremely large compared to the energy of the particle. Okay, देखो, E equal to Q. This is the energy of the particle. V naught is the barrier energy. Okay, so that means if you are increasing if the barrier is like infinite तो कभी practically होता नहीं है. So if we say this 2000 electron volt and the electron energy is only 1 electron volt, then this is the scenario. So you are essentially reaching out to the practical situation of infinite potential well. Okay, very good. So again, let's come back to the original one which we had seen. Now इफ द बैरियर हाइट को अगर कम करते हैं तो अब क्या होगा? ऑब्वियसली यू आर clearly you can understand what is going to happen. Okay, the probability of penetration inside the barrier, probability of tunneling is much larger. Very simple. Okay, so now what is the significance of this when we are talking about the real devices? जब हम लोग सब देखेंगे बाद में MOSFET में करेंगे, BJT में करेंगे. In the transistors we are always looking for, I told you, no, we are trying to reduce this part. Okay, so what is the probability of doing that? So you have to choose a material whose band gaps are such that it is not going to penetrate anymore. Okay, so when we spoke about like 2000 electron volts, it is like this. This is a similar situation when there is a metal and oxide interface. So when we are speaking about a metal oxide semiconductor, what will happen? There is no probability for the electrons to go from the semiconductor to the metal and vice versa. That is why it is called a dielectric or gate oxide. Okay, so the material which we choose for the gate oxide should have a barrier which is much larger than the energy of the particle. ठीक है, वेरी नाइस. और क्या हम स्टडी कर सकते हैं इसमें? I think it's 3 o'clock, so I think it is fine for now. Okay, so this is what you have to essentially write in your report, or at least you should be able to I mean, you should be you should kind of appreciate that this is going on at the quantum world. So in the question, when I had specifically mentioned, like hardly anybody wrote this, discuss the physical insights on the quantum phenomena associated with this system. So this is what. So when I was teaching this topic, remember I used to tell you like ऐसा ऐसा होगा, ऐसा होना है. Okay. So now you can mathematically see, you can really see it right in front of your eyes, using this code itself, how it will behave. Okay, so now you have got an idea about this. Okay, so that's all for today. I'll just stop the recording, and please note that I have also uploaded